The first time I saw the cabins, I thought I'd driven onto the wrong property. 40 of them, lined up like a budget summer camp complete with gravel walkways and cheap porch swings. But this was my land. All 120 acres of it, named Xander Haskett. I'm a retired firefighter who bought this ranch 5 years ago, just outside a little town called Briar Hollow. I'm not fancy. I raise goats, fix my own fences, and keep to myself. The property came with a few outbuildings, a well, and something I hadn't had much of before. Then the HOA decided they owned it. It started 2 months ago when I noticed trucks rumbling past the barbed wire fence at the far edge of my ranch. I thought it was road work at first. Then I spotted a couple of guys laying down concrete pads. A week later, the cabins started popping up like mushrooms after rain. I drove out there, cut through the low brush, and ran right into a woman in a pastel tracksuit barking orders at some college-age kids holding blueprints. "Excuse me," I said. "What exactly are you building on my land?" She turned around like I was a fly that landed in her mimosa. "I'm Georgia Langford," she said, tapping her clipboard like it was holy scripture. "President of the Willow Creek HOA, and this isn't your land. This is designated common space for the new community expansion." I blinked. "Community expansion? The cabins," she said, gesturing like Vanna White. "Affordable vacation rentals for HOA members. It's all been approved. You must be one of the older owners who didn't read the amendment packet." I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just said, "Show me the paperwork." Georgia huffed, digging through her binder like she was about to win a courtroom drama. She pulled out a blurry photocopy of a survey map with some faint highlighter marks and a signature that definitely wasn't mine. "That's cute," I said, "but I've got the original deed." She waved her hand. "Oh, please. These things get updated all the time. You're clearly confused." I wasn't. But I also wasn't going to argue with a woman who looked like she yelled at cashiers for sport. I just took a photo of everything the cabins, the maps, and went straight to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a guy named Walt who smelled like permanent marker and coffee, took one look at the deed and said, "Yeah, this whole stretch, still yours. No easements, no transfers. If anyone built something here, they did it illegally." Walt gave me copies of everything. He even stamped it like it was Christmas. By the time I got back home, there were already cars pulling up to the cabins. Renters, tourists, some were dragging coolers, others setting up hammocks. I even saw a couple lighting a fire pit. Georgia was walking the gravel path like the queen of HOA land. "You need to leave now, Mr. Haskett," she called out. "This is private HOA property." I held up the stamped deed and grinned. "Not according to the county." That's when her face changed. Like someone had unplugged her from the wall. That's not possible," she stammered. "I didn't say anything else. I just walked back to my truck and pulled up a lawn chair. If they wanted to play games on my land, I was going to watch every move they made, and then take it all." "Let the games begin." HOA story, HOA stories, homeowners association stories. The morning after my first little chat with Georgia Langford, I woke up to hammering. Not far off, generic hammering either. This was close. Rhythmic, measured, someone was building again. I grabbed my coffee, walked out to the porch, and spotted 2 men in neon vests installing what looked like a security gate along the gravel path that sliced into my land. The thing had metal posts, a keypad, and wires running to a freshly planted utility box. They were anchoring it right into the ground, not 5 feet from one of the survey markers I'd driven in myself when I bought the property. I didn't bother yelling. I just snapped a few pictures, then called my attorney, Gwen Mercado. Gwen's the kind of lawyer that makes other lawyers nervous. 40 years in property and land use law, and not once has she lost a boundary dispute. She picked up on the second ring. "You're calling early. Let me guess your new squatters decided to redecorate. They're putting in a gate on my road." There was a pause. "Okay," she said. "We're done playing nice." By that afternoon, Gwen had a cease and desist order filed with the county court, backed by a verified plat map, land registration, and a declaration of unauthorized use. We served it directly to the Willow Creek HOA office, which was located in a repurposed model home with fake shutters and a fountain that hadn't worked since spring. I stood by while the process server handed the documents to a man in khakis and a tucked-in golf shirt. He looked confused, then annoyed, then mumbled something about talking to Georgia. That night, I drove out to the cabins again. One of the renters, a family from Fort Worth, was roasting hot dogs outside their unit. The dad came over, offered me a beer, and asked if I was with the HOA. "No," I said. "They're trespassing on my property. So technically, you're renting a vacation cabin built on stolen land." He blinked. "Wait, are you serious?" I nodded and handed him one of the flyers Gwen had me print. It explained the situation in plain English: unauthorized development, illegal construction, fraudulent land claim. I'd included a QR code that linked to the county's land registry showing my name on the deed. The next morning, 6 cars pulled out in a hurry. By noon, 5 cabins were empty. Apparently, word spread fast when people realized they might be sleeping on someone else's ranch under false pretenses. Georgia, unsurprisingly, was not pleased. She showed up at my front gate in a white SUV with tinted windows, honked twice, and stepped out with her clipboard like it was a weapon. "You're interfering with HOA operations," she said as I approached. "No," I replied. "I'm defending my property from people who think they can pave over whatever isn't nailed down." She tried to hand me a letter. I didn't take it. "This is a formal warning," she said. "You're in violation of community cohesion guidelines." "I'm not in your community," I said, "and you're on my land, again." She faltered for half a second, then she tossed the letter at my feet and stomped back to her car. That's when I noticed something, a small, laminated sign zip tied to the new gate they'd installed. It read, "Private property HOA use only, trespassers will be fined." I took a picture. The next step was easy. I took everything I had: photos, documents, the cease and desist violation, the sign, and gave it to Gwen. She added it to the civil case she was building. But then she did something else. She filed a criminal complaint. See, it turned out Georgia and her board hadn't just built without permission. They'd filed forged maps with the county's zoning office. Claimed my parcel was part of a communal easement. The signature on the transfer form, not mine, not even close. It belonged to someone named Xander Haskett. The county investigator didn't need long to figure out it was fake. Gwen called me the day after the investigator visited the HOA office. "They're rattled," she said, "and they should be. Forging a land transfer is a felony. If they pushed it through to collect money from renters, that's wire fraud and tax evasion." That's when we looped in the sheriff. Sheriff Maddox was one of those rare types who didn't automatically side with the HOA. He wore work boots, drove his own truck, and had a deep dislike for anyone who thought a clipboard gave them divine authority. He personally came out to the site. We walked the length of the cabins together. I showed him the gate, the utility hookups, the laminated signs, and the trash bins labeled Willow Creek HOA guests only. He took pictures, a lot of them. "They built all this without a permit?" he asked. "Not a single one," I said. "No septic plans, no electrical approvals, no zoning variants." He gave a low whistle. "They're gonna regret this." By the following week, the court issued a temporary injunction. All rental activity had to stop immediately. Anyone occupying the cabins had 72 hours to vacate. The gate had to be removed, and the HOA was barred from further development or access until the matter was resolved. You'd think that would have stopped them. Instead, Georgia tried a new tactic. She called a meeting. Not a regular HOA meeting either. This one was billed as an emergency community assembly. She sent out glossy flyers to every home in Willow Creek warning of external threats to neighborhood integrity. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. I stood in the back of the clubhouse, an over-air-conditioned building with folding chairs and stale cookies. and listened while Georgia spun a tale about land confusion and unauthorized interference from non-residents. One man raised his hand. "Is it true you built rental cabins on someone else's land?" Georgia tried to brush it off. "We were under the impression the parcel had reverted to communal ownership due to easement expiration." Another woman chimed in. "But the county says otherwise. I checked the registry." "The land's still his." That's when I stepped forward. "Afternoon," I said. "My name's Xander Haskett. I own the land those cabins sit on. I have the deed, the surveys, and the legal filings to prove it." "Your HOA president submitted forged documents and illegally collected rent from vacationers on my property." Gasps rippled through the room. A few people stood up. Georgia tried to interrupt. I kept going. "As of now, the court has frozen all rental operations. And when this case is done, I'll be pursuing damages. Every cabin, every gate, every penny collected, it all adds up, and you'll be paying it back." One of the HOA board members quietly slipped out the side door. I left the meeting to a mixture of stunned silence and low murmurs. By nightfall, Gwen had received 3 anonymous tips from HOA members' emails full of screenshots, board meeting minutes, and even a draft budget showing projected income from rustic cabin rentals. They'd planned the whole thing months in advance, and now I had the proof. The morning after the emergency HOA meeting, my phone rang just after sunrise. It was Gwen. "They blinked," she said. "Langford's lawyer reached out. They're offering to settle quietly, terms not disclosed, but he mentioned mutual misunderstanding and amicable resolution." I walked outside, still chewing a piece of toast. The cabins were quiet now. No lights, no smoke from chimneys, no tourists. Just rows of empty porches with plastic chairs swaying in the wind like they were waiting for a verdict. "They want to settle," I said. "That tells me they're trying to keep something buried." "They are," Gwen replied. "I got the budget files from one of the board members who jumped ship last night. They falsified expense reports and redirected HOA fees into a private account labeled Infrastructure Expansion Initiative. It's not just your land they stole. They used community funds to build it. That alone would have been enough to sink them." But Gwen kept going, "And that's not the worst of it." She paused. "They filed for a federal grant." I stopped in my tracks. "A what?" "Tourism development subsidy. 40 cabins, eco-friendly infrastructure, local economic growth." They secured almost $300,000 under a fabricated joint ownership agreement, claimed they had unanimous resident approval and full land rights. I didn't answer immediately. I stood there, watching a tumbleweed roll across the dirt path like something out of a movie. "Fraud across state lines, Xander. That's federal. They're in deep." By noon, Gwen had contacted the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Fraud Division. An hour later, an investigator named Charles Timmons called me personally. He was calm, methodical, and asked all the right questions. "Did you ever sign a partnership agreement with the Willow Creek HOA?" "No." "Did you authorize them to represent your property in any financial filings?" "Absolutely not." Timmons didn't say much after that. He just asked for copies of everything: the deed, the construction photos, the court filings, even the QR-coded flyers. I sent them all in a single PDF. 2 days later, unmarked sedans rolled into Willow Creek. I was feeding the goats when I saw them. 3 cars, clean, no logos, all black. They parked outside the HOA office and walked in like they owned the place. Men and women in navy jackets, earpieces in, clipboards under their arms. The kind of people who don't knock, they announce. By sundown, 2 laptops, 4 boxes of documents, and the HOA's entire accounting server were loaded into the back of a government van. Georgia wasn't there. But the treasurer, a man named Stuart Crowley, was. He didn't even try to walk out the front door. They escorted him through the garage like he was radioactive. That night, I sat with Gwen on my porch as the sun dropped behind the ridge. "They're going to push for indictments," she said. "Langford's name is all over the application. She signed the grant paperwork herself." Forging land ownership and misusing federal funds. That's prison time. I stared out at the cabins. The place looked like a ghost town now. No renters, no lights, just rows of hollow buildings rotting into the dirt. You think they'll try to blame it all on Stewart? I asked. They'll try, Gwen said. But we've got email trails, meeting minutes. And now federal investigators have access to every document. There's no running from this. The next day, I received a letter from Georgia Langford, hand-delivered, no stamp. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a gold Willow Creek seal embossed in the corner. Inside was a typed apology and a 5-paragraph defense of her intentions. I read the first line: "Our goal was always to enhance the community experience," then tossed it in the burn barrel. That afternoon, Sheriff Maddox returned with a deputy and a county assessor. "We're here to document the structures for evidence," he said. "Federal request. They want a full inventory before any demolition or property seizure." "Demolition?" I asked. Maddox nodded. "If the cabins were built without permits, they're illegal structures. On top of that, HUD wants restitution. They may auction the salvage rights or hand it over to you." "To me," I raised an eyebrow, "you own the land. They built on it. You may end up with everything by default." I didn't answer. I just unlocked the gate and let them in. They spent the next 4 hours photographing every square inch, measuring foundations, logging power hookups, even cataloging the cheap pine furniture inside each unit. The deputy took note of water damage in one of the back cabins. Apparently, the plumbing had been rushed and installed without pressure testing. "Pipes burst sometime last week. By the time they finished, Maddox gave me a nod. "Federal court's moving quick," he said. "You'll probably see a notice of seizure within the month." Sure enough, 3 weeks later I got the letter. The cabins were now officially mine. The federal court ruled that, because the structures were illegally built on my land, and the HOA had no legal right to develop or profit from them, all physical assets were transferred to me as part of restitution. Any damages to my property were to be covered by the seizure of HOA funds. Langford and Crowley were formally charged with wire fraud, falsifying federal documents, and conspiracy to commit land theft, the icing on the cake. HUD froze the HOA's accounts. Every homeowner in Willow Creek received a letter explaining that their dues had been misappropriated, and the board was being dissolved pending a full forensic audit. I had no interest in becoming a landlord, so I listed the cabins as salvage. A local contractor offered a fair sum to dismantle and haul them off. Said he could repurpose the lumber for storage barns and hunting cabins upstate. As they tore down the structures over the next month, I watched from my porch with a glass of iced tea in hand. No more tourists, no more clipboards. Just peace and the slow return of open sky. A week before the last cabin came down, one of the former HOA board members, a quiet woman named Denise, drove out to see me. She parked by the fence and approached with a folder in her hand. "I was never okay with what they did," she said. "I voted against it, but Georgia overruled us, said she had executive authority. I brought you this." She handed me a flash drive, meeting recordings, the ones they didn't log in the official minutes. Langford's voice is on all of them. She knew it was illegal. I nodded. "Thank you." Denise hesitated, then looked out at the open field where the cabins had once stood. "This place was never supposed to be like that. We moved here for the quiet. She turned it into a business." "She turned it into a scam," I corrected. She gave a small nod, then left without another word. That flash drive. Gwen handed it off to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Last I heard, they were adding charges. In the end, the HOA was dismantled. A new residents committee was formed, this time elected by full vote. No more secret meetings or power grabs. They asked me to join. I declined. I like my fences, my goats, and the wind through the brush. I don't need a title or a committee to know what's right. As for Georgia Langford, last I heard, she was trying to claim she was set up, that Stewart acted alone, that she was just a figurehead. But the recordings told a different story. The paperwork was in her name, Every order, every forged signature, every misused dollar. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it leaves nothing standing. The contractor's crew finished hauling away the last frame by early August. What had once looked like a knockoff resort now resembled a patchy field of disturbed soil and broken gravel. I stood on the ridge behind my barn, watching the bulldozer scrape up the last of the concrete pads like it was peeling off a scab. Gwen called that evening. "The IRS wants to talk to you," she said. "Not because you're in trouble, quite the opposite. They're building a tax fraud case against the HOA board, and they want your statement about how the cabins operated." "I figured someone would eventually notice," I said. 40 rentals and not a single tax form filed. That had to raise flags. They used a fake LLC registered to a P.O. box 3 counties over, Gwen explained. Called it Sunset Ridge Cooperative, claimed it was an independent vendor managing the rentals. But the payments flowed right into the HOA's operating account. Let me guess, Langford signed the Articles of Incorporation. Right next to Crowley, she said. And they backdated it 6 months. Federal agents had already seized the HOA's financial records, but Gwen had turned up even more through discovery a series of emails between the board and a shady tax consultant who offered to launder the rental income through fabricated maintenance contracts. It was all there: phony invoices, shell companies, and a spreadsheet titled Q2 Adjusted Earnings that showed over $90,000 in unreported revenue. The fallout spread fast. The Willow Creek postmaster confirmed that Georgia had accessed the P.O. box personally every week. The HOA's maintenance contractor admitted under oath that he'd never worked on the cabins they paid him to say he did. And the former bookkeeper, a soft-spoken woman named Cheryl, turned over a flash drive with full backups of the HOA's financial software. When she testified, she mentioned something I hadn't heard before. They had a second set of books, she said. Georgia called it the clean copy. The real one had notes like reclassify as landscaping and don't record until after audit. I kept them both. That was the final nail. The IRS filed formal charges against Langford, Crowley, and 2 other board members for conspiracy to commit tax fraud, falsifying federal documents and structuring. That last one, they'd made sure no renter paid more than $8,000 at a time to avoid triggering bank reporting laws. It didn't work. A grand jury indicted them within the month. I was called to testify in the federal fraud trial as a key witness. The courthouse in Briar Hollow was too small for a federal case, so we met in the district courthouse 2 towns over. I wore my cleanest boots and a jacket that didn't smell like hay. The prosecutor, a woman named Tasha Lynn, asked me to describe the first time I saw the cabins. I told her about the trucks, the concrete pads, the pastel clipboard. She asked if I'd ever given permission to build on my land. I said no. She asked if I'd received any compensation. I said no again. Simple answers. Honest ones. Langford sat at the defense table, stone-faced, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too tight and a necklace that looked out of place in a courtroom. She didn't look at me once. When the defense tried to argue that the cabins were an honest mistake, Lynn brought out the signed lease agreements, dozens of them, each printed with the fake LLC header. She also presented a photo of a whiteboard from the HOA office, captured by a whistleblower, labeled Revenue Projections Expansion Phase 2. They'd planned to build 20 more. In closing arguments, Lynn laid it out clean. They stole land. They falsified ownership. They collected rent. They hid the money, and they did it while pretending to represent a community. The jury came back in less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Langford got 9 years. Crowley got 8. The other 2 board members took plea deals and received reduced sentences, provided they testified in the state-level civil suits that followed. The judge ordered full restitution to all homeowners in the subdivision. Every dollar of misused dues had to be returned. The court-appointed receiver put the HOA's remaining assets up for auction, including their clubhouse, signage, and maintenance equipment. I didn't bid on anything. I'd already gotten what mattered, my land. My name cleared, and the truth out in the open. A few weeks after the sentencing, I got a letter from the new Interim Residence Committee. They weren't calling themselves an HOA anymore, just a neighborhood board. They asked if I'd be willing to come speak at their first open forum, not as a member, just as someone who stood their ground. I agreed. The gathering was held in the community park. No folding chairs, no microphones, no catered snacks. Just folks sitting under the trees, kids playing in the grass, and neighbors listening. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. I didn't set out to fight a board, I said. I just wanted to be left alone. But sometimes, standing still is the loudest thing you can do. If you know what's right and you've got the truth on your side, don't back down, not for anyone. Especially not for people who hide behind rules they don't follow themselves. A few people clapped. Not the polite kind, the kind that comes from knowing what you've lived through. I nodded once, then walked back to my truck. That night, I drove back out to the far edge of the ranch. The soil where the cabins had stood was slowly healing. Grass was starting to push through the gravel, and the deer had returned, cautious but curious. I leaned against the gatepost, arms crossed, no more signs. No more gates, no more strangers with clipboards, just sky, stars, and the slow rustle of wind through the brush. I'd started building a fence line again, not to keep people out, but to mark what was mine. The cedar posts were spaced farther apart this time. No barbed wire, just a quiet reminder, my land, my rules, my peace. And now, finally, no one left to take it.